Up next, I am honored to introduce Stephanie Spera, who will be discussing land use land cover in Amazonia.
Hi, everybody. I think everyone can hear me. Thanks, everyone. It's been a great series of talks. My name is Stephanie Spera. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Richmond, and I'm also a NASA Surveyor Applied Sciences team member. And today I'm going to talk to you about land cover change and capacity building across Amazonia and beyond. Next slide, please. If you tuned in yesterday, you may have heard Milagros talk about NASA Surveyor, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview of this program because it's an important part of NASA's Applied Sciences program, and it's also what the work I'm going to show you is funded by. So NASA Surveyor is a joint development initiative of NASA and USAID, and it lies at this important intersection of science, technology, and innovation. So when we're talking about space to village, we're talking about bringing NASA's data and expertise to USAID's development network. So scientists work together with local, regional, and national stakeholders to translate data into useful tools, services, and information for sustainable decision-making. So think about things like improved management of natural resources, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and greater resilience to climate change, which given yesterday's IPCC report, I think we need more than ever. There are 5 regional hubs across 3 continents, and Surveyor works in 50 countries. So I, along with 19 other scientists, are part of the 3rd Applied Sciences team, and we bring our expertise on satellite data analysis, land use change, drought, fire risk, water, weather, climate. And at the very end of this talk, I'm going to circle back and chat about what I get to do and see in my role as the Land Cover and Ecosystems AST team lead. But next slide, please. Let's jump into what my team is working on, my small little team, which is the Amazon. So next slide. I want to talk about 2 of the biggest motivators of this work. The Amazon is home to over 25% of the world's terrestrial species. It's the world's largest river basin. It comprises nearly half of tropical forest carbon stocks. And it also provides ecosystem services to 33 million people, including 1.5 million indigenous people from 385 different groups, all living within the biome boundary. And some scientists fear the Amazon may be approaching a tipping point. Basically, where projected changes in climate, coupled with the effects of local and regional changes due to deforestation, affect the climate of the Amazon so much so that it dries out and becomes a savanna. And no one wants that to happen for a multitude of reasons. Next slide, please. So our team is working in the Southwestern Amazon. You can see it zoomed in on the map on the right, across Ucayali, Peru, and Acre, Brazil. This region contains enormous swaths of intact forest. It is also really interesting because we're working across 2 countries in Peru and Brazil. So even though nature doesn't know boundaries, GIS files do and stakeholders do, so it's inherently tricky to work across. But importantly, if you look at this data from STAL and Nature Communications, the box outlines the same the box on the left is the same box on the right. Like much of the Amazon, this region we're interested in is extremely vulnerable to this tipping point. So motivation number 1 is tipping point. Next slide, please. The second, more specific motivation of our team choosing this region to focus on is that my co-I, David Salisbury, has been working with the indigenous people on the Jirua and Purus rivers for over 2 decades. So our work is both grounded by, is motivated by and grounded in collaboration with our local partners. David has put on multiple climate change focused workshops with indigenous groups along these rivers. And the participants in these workshops stated that they noticed less predictable precipitation and stream flow, drier soils, warmer air temperatures, a less humid forest. And we all know that those who have contributed least to global climate change are most likely to feel its effects. So we want to provide these communities with the knowledge and tools to empower them and improve their resiliency. And what's currently happening in this transboundary region is that state and national governments are really pushing development through road construction and connectivity. But we know from decades of studying the Eastern Amazon, roads beget deforestation, which beget roads. And with that often comes negative environmental consequences. Next slide, please. I like this schematic. I use it in all of my talks because it illustrates what I think about all the time, which is trade-offs between ecosystem services. So we have 3 flower petal diagrams. And on the left, we can think of that as an intact tropical forest. In the middle, we can think of that as a managed landscape. And on the right, we can sort of think of that as our ideal. So in that left diagram, that intact tropical forest, provides all these ecosystem services, right? Carbon sequestration, biodiversity, everything else listed there. That middle diagram, we have a highly managed landscape where crops are produced. And food is a really important ecosystem service, but with it, you could lose that biodiversity and that water flow regulation. But it's okay to be okay with this trade-off. People need to eat. But on that right flower diagram, we have more of a goal where we're balancing whatever modified landscape variable like crop production and the other ecosystem services that tropical forests provide. So our goal is always to try and get to that right petal diagram. Next slide, please. But these trade-offs are important. So even though the portion of the Amazon we're working in right now is still largely untouched, we know that land use changes lead to changes in the water and energy balance. And this slide illustrates these dynamics in central Brazil. So on the left, we have a Landsat 8 image from 2016, and those rectangular shapes there are huge agricultural fields. You see that scale bar says 25 kilometers. This is a part of Brazil where there's been widespread clearing of natural vegetation for agriculture. And on the right, you have modus evapotranspiration data from the same time period and my very scientific scale, where blue corresponds to a lot of water being recycled back up into the atmosphere, yellow is somewhere in the middle, and red is not so much. And the punchline is, when you clear native vegetation, you get a lot less water recycled back up into the atmosphere. That's really important for the Amazon because 25 to 50% of the rainfall there is recycled. So you can easily imagine a world where if you clear cut so much, you put so little water back up into the atmosphere that you reach that tipping point that people are afraid of. So with all this in mind, let's go back to our project in the Southwestern Amazon. Next slide, please. So we are asking two simple questions with complex answers, actually. How has land use and land cover changed? And what are the effects on these land cover changes on ecosystem services? Next slide. So we spent the first year of the project asking this first question: how has land cover changed? And it was tricky to get a handle on because not only did we want to map deforestation, but we also wanted to map forest degradation, which is typical in this part of the Amazon, but also just inherently more difficult to map. Like ads, we also loved a machine learning random forest algorithm. That's what you're seeing the results of right now. These are Landsat data. So as this GIF runs, I just want us to note that it's not showing deforestation, but all forest disturbances. So any area that was either deforested or degraded in the year that pops up. And I've highlighted the box in that green on the Ucayali River in particular, because it gets at just what a lot of our indigenous and conservation-based stakeholders are worried about: road building. You can just watch that road in the middle be built over time. And I also want to highlight one of the things that we did while doing this analysis is that we compared 3 common Landsat mapping algorithms. We wrote all of this code in Google Earth Engine with the intention that we could share it with our stakeholders in terms of capacity building. And I'll talk about that in a second. Next slide, please. So now that we've done this mapping, we can dig into what I think is the fun stuff, and that's thinking about ecosystem services. We first investigated observational weather station data, so variables like temperature, precipitation, and stream flow. It turns out there are not too many weather stations with consistent data in this part of the Amazon, but in the 4 watersheds which we have data, which are colored in here, we do see that maximum temperatures are increasing, minimum temperatures are increasing. We do not see a signal with precipitation, and importantly, none of these trends are correlated with forest disturbances. Instead, they're related to larger global atmospheric signals like general climate change, and then ENSO and the NAO, which is sort of a good thing. The forest disturbances here aren't actually large enough that they're affecting regional climates. That's a silver lining. Next slide, please. We're just starting to work on the remotely sensed-based ecosystem services analysis, but here's a quick snapshot of our initial work. On the graph on the left, we have the mean of monthly land surface temperature by forest condition. This is MODIS 1 kilometer land surface temperature data. And we looked at the average monthly temperatures over non-forest, intact forest, degraded forest, and deforestation. And we see that intact forest, which is in lime green or the second column, has cooler land surface temperatures across the entire year than any other land cover, which makes sense. So now we're working on understanding how much cooler the land surface could be if no land cover change had occurred. And we're going to look at other variables that are remotely sensed, like precipitation, soil moisture from SMAP, evapotranspiration. And the goal of this work then is to create a tool that will allow users to input land cover scenarios, say planned or proposed roads or forest clearing, and then use these statistical relationships between land use and land cover change and ecosystem services to understand the potential effects on the ecosystem services themselves. And this leads into capacity building. Next slide, please. One of Severe's program's goals is to improve environmental management and resilience by strengthening the capacity of stakeholders to integrate Earth observations into decision making. So COVID threw us all for a loop, right? But we've pivoted pretty well. So could you go to the next slide, please? Our team holds monthly stakeholder meetings to share our results and gather feedback online, obviously. We've had 2 really successful 2-day trainings in using Google Earth Engine to map forest degradation using Landsat-based algorithms. These trainings are held in Spanish, had over 50 participants from 6 countries in South America. We published these training materials in English and Spanish. Next slide, please. We've developed an app that allows users to see changes in land use in real time. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, this work was wholly motivated by my co-I's years of research with Indigenous groups and leaders in this region. And these groups are really interested in the effects that proposed roads might have on their communities. So you can see here an Ashenica leader presenting on the potential effects of a proposed Peruvian road using one of our analysis maps. So even though we can't get down to even though we cannot get down to Peru and Brazil right now, at least our data and our maps can. Last slide, please. Oh, one more, thank you. And I just want to finish by circling back to Sevier as a whole. So I'm the Land Use and Land Cover Applied Sciences team leader, and I get to see all of the great work being done across Sevier. It was just the Olympics, so I was inspired to use this graphic to represent our program. But the Sevier ASTs have fantastic, important projects covering everything from mapping deforestation to degradation, to crops, to fires, to running scenarios. And these projects are all addressing services like regional land cover monitoring systems, forest disturbance alerts, sustainable development planning, and inputs to economic and ecological zoning maps. So I'm just going to close by talking about one project I'm really excited about that I'm leading with Africa Flores at NASA. It's an endeavor unlike any I've taken on before, but it's a global land cover mapping collaboration. Across our 7 Sevier AST members, we have a wealth of knowledge, particularly when it comes to land cover mapping algorithm creation and refinement. And as PIs, our projects have end dates, but stakeholders in these regions will need to make decisions after our funding runs out. And as members of Sevier, our goal is both to transfer our project tools and results, but also the scientific capacity to make assessments at the hub and local, regional, and national levels. So we're doing this global land cover mapping effort, and essentially it's a global capacity building effort. There are so many land cover mapping algorithms or products out there. How does a non-remote sensing expert know which to use based on what they're interested in mapping and where they are in the world? So right now, behind the scenes, we're working with all of the Sevier hubs and implementing common land cover mapping algorithms to create a framework for understanding best practices and approaches when mapping land cover across the globe, with the end goal then of empowering stakeholders with the information and tools necessary to make informed decisions as our global climate changes. Next slide, please. Thank you, and I just want to highlight my collaborators at University of Richmond, David Salisbury, Yinwen Regadas, and our colleagues at UFAC and UNU, and our collaborators at the Hub. That's my email address. Thank you so much.